It is now my privilege to introduce our next keynote speaker, Kate Arthur. She is a British-Canadian entrepreneur and global leader in advancing artificial intelligence and computer literacy. With over 25 years in technology, education, and communications, Kate works with governments, civil society, and corporations to bring AI public awareness and education into communities worldwide. She is an advisor to the Montreal AI Ethics Institute and a collaborator with the AI in Education Interdisciplinary Research Hub at Oxford University. Kate has contributed to UNESCO's AI competency frameworks for teachers and students, and is a member of Canada's AI Public Awareness Working Group. Please join me in welcoming Kate to the stage.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and yes, I am British. So I am originally from, my hometown is in Kenyakahaka, which is in Montreal, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here in Alaska. I've never been. Such a warm welcome, and I had the pleasure of going on the entrepreneur tour, and my biggest takeaway was Alaskan women rock. Well, it was just wonderful, these entrepreneurial women who took massive risks to be themselves, to be authentic, and really to do some great stuff here. So thanks for having me. Montreal, which has a bit of an AI story to itself. Montreal is the international hub for responsible AI, and it focuses on the ethical implications of AI. We have 35,000 researchers and experts in our AI in the city, so I think that's actually more people than in Juneau here in the city, and that's largely because we have 6 major universities. We're also a research R&D hub for a lot of the large companies, like Steve had mentioned, Google DeepMind, Meta's there, Samsung's there, so we really have this network. My objective today is to talk less about the technology and the impacts of AI, and about why being literate, why understanding how AI works is fundamental to the success and health of communities and to innovation. So before I go into a little bit on the innovation, I want to share a bit about my story and my journey, and why literacy is so important to me, and why the word and the way we communicate and connect with each other as human beings is important, and even more so in today's world with AI. I studied English literature, and then I moved back to the UK to work in entertainment as a publicist. I love the written word, the ability to write a sentence and for it to connect us, to share stories, to record our stories, to bring us together as people, to advance together. And I thought that's what I would be doing forever, was writing and connecting with artists and with other people. And then I met my husband in 2000, who is a computer scientist, and I realized I'm not literate. I thought my whole childhood and my whole career to that point, I knew how to communicate. I had the skills I needed. You know, I had been educated, well educated, so fortunate for that. But I was becoming illiterate because I didn't know how to code. I didn't understand computers, these machines that were able to build and create for us in building a digital world that I felt disconnected from. And so I thought, well, you know, I had this IT company with my husband. We were about 8 years in, and I thought, we've got to do something about this. At the time, my 3 daughters were little, and they were entering into the school system. And I thought, if they don't know how to code, if they don't understand the communication between computers and human beings, what are we doing as a service in our education systems to make sure that they're prepared? They're prepared to communicate, create, to be socially and economically responsible citizens. That's why we send our kids to school. That's why 20 plus years, if we're fortunate, to be able to get into the education system, a free public education system. So I started a charity called Kids Code Jeunesse, now called Digital Moment. And we reached every province and territory across Canada. Canada has 2 official languages, so that was in English and in French. And in 2017, bringing in computing skills, we realized there's something else happening. And the early signs of AI starting to emerge. Siri was being used, so Siri's 2012 coming in into my kids' lives and into the school systems. And we thought we need to move forward and explore this. So we entered into a partnership. I make it sound so easy. It wasn't as easy as this sounds, but we entered into a partnership with UNESCO to work with 193 member states globally to bring AI public awareness and education to the communities and to make sure that the gap between those who have and those who have not doesn't widen because of AI. I stepped down from my role in 2023 because to write a book called Redefining Literacy in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. And I want us to dig in, and hopefully if I do my job right today, you'll look at data a little differently. And you'll look at what it means to be literate a little differently, because it's much more than knowing how to read and write. And data is much more than numbers on a spreadsheet. Our world is changing, and I think you saw a lot of that from what Steve shared today. As Charlie mentioned, I also guest lecture at a few universities. I won't go into this too much more. I'm going to tell a few stories. And this one here I'm going to talk about is the Inca Empire and what it means to be literate to innovation. So as a child and into my teens, I spent most of my time traveling overseas. We were an engineering family. I lived in many different countries, and we had part of my family lived in Peru, and part of my family lived in England. And the photo in the middle is me in Cusco in Peru, where I got to spend quite a lot of time with my Uncle Bill. My grandmother, my great-uncle Bill, moved to Peru in the 1940s. And Bill was a polyglot. He spoke 7 languages, including Spanish and Quechua, the indigenous language. He was actually an honorary president of the Quechua Society in Cusco. He was a textile engineer, and he was a mathematician, and he was a cryptographer. So he was able to look at data from many different angles, not just numbers and not just words, not just verbal. And when he got to Peru and eventually fell in love, as you do, and had a family with an Inca woman, he discovered the quipu knots. And these quipu knots were known to be accounting systems, recording of accounting information. And he thought, there's got to be more. These quipu knots have to be more than just accounting systems. And at the time, and still in some communities around the world, there's a theory that the Incas were never literate. They never had a way of recording their history, recording their stories, communicating between different nations and different parts of the empire. And my Uncle Bill, he thought, no, there's no way. A society with such rich, advanced engineering, roads, had to have some way of communicating with each other and connecting and recording. And so he ended up spending his life writing about that and worked with the Peruvian government and the universities in Peru, decoding the Inca code. And why I tell that story is because there's a pattern to why we need to be literate and what that means. So there are really 3 components that I've spent the last several years studying what it means to be literate, and this is sort of where I'm kind of falling on, and Steve, I'm taking your 3 from you. There are really 3 parts to being literate. There is the actual material tool. So in the case of the Inca Empire, there were the quipus. Each knot and each color of a string said something. It communicated a message that was recorded. The chasquis were the communication network. These are very young, physically strong men who were able to run vast distances across the empire, connecting groups of men with other groups of men, and what they were doing is transferring these quipu knots to get to the various leaders. And then there were the quipu Cuauhtémocs, who were sorry, I'm losing my track there. The quipu Cuauhtémocs, who were the knowledge holders, the knowledge keepers. They were able to input the data, so they could not only write the quipus, they could read the quipus. Then they were able to translate that and communicate that back to the leaders, and then respond so that the chasquis could then continue that message. The quipu Cuauhtémocs were powerful because they were literate. If they were in an environment where hundreds of thousands of people were listening and waiting for them to say, they could really say whatever they wanted because nobody else had the skills to be able to translate these quipu knots. So what does it mean to be literate? If the answer to this question is yes, then you have some basic literacy skills. 20% of Americans would not be able to read this. 50% of Americans would not be able to move much further with this. So they would have their basic grade 6 fundamentals of literacy. There are 800 million people in the world who would not be able to read a sentence in their language. So for all of us to be literate, it does start with knowing how to read and write, even in the world of AI, to be able to write prompts and to interact with artificial intelligence systems. We do need to have these basic literacy skills. So as I talk about being AI literate, it is not to the detriment or to the ignoring these skills, the basic skills. Let's look at data a little differently here. So we did a 2 + 2, I think, before, but now we have a 1 + 1. Think about the process, what's going on in your head. Your voice in your head is telling you 1 plus 1 = 2. And here we have the same thing, but in a different format of data, right? 1 + 1 = 2. I was a high school student when my tutor realized I was failing math so badly because I didn't connect with the numbers, but I connected with the words. And that small change made the world of difference and allowed me to graduate. This also says the same thing. So these are all bits of data in different formats showing us the same message. And we're all able to translate through our education what that means. So there's a process that your brain went through when you were reading 1 + 1 = 2. We were inputting data, we were processing the information, and then what we formatted, what came out was knowledge. And we'll see a little later that this is the same process that our machines do. We input data as humans, we process it with our brains, and we output it as knowledge. So literacy, there are many, many, many different ways of defining it. This is what I have defined literacy as through the work that I've been doing that bridges the different literacies throughout history. But literacy is a valued and socially accepted skills, knowledge, and tools necessary to create, communicate, and understand information. We are literate when we can access the data, transform it into knowledge, and respond meaningfully so we can have that communication. And all within the material and social frameworks that enable that connection. So if we don't have pens and papers in our society and a way of sharing that, then there's no need for us to be able to read and write. But there were reasons why we all know how to read and write, because they were built into the social fabrics of our society. UNESCO defines literacy as driving sustainable development, enabling greater participation in the labor market, improving child and family health and nutrition, reducing poverty, and expanding life opportunities. So it's a pretty important part of our education and of what we need as skills as human beings. So in the Industrial Revolutions, and I'll try and trying to add to what Steve had brought a little earlier in his presentation. But the Industrial Revolutions play a really important role as to why we're here today. You know, we needed the Industry 1 with the steam power and mechanization, to Industry 2 with the mass production, communications, and industry. But it was really in the third Industrial Revolution, here it's 1969, but a little earlier than that even, when computers started to come into our world. So we went from massive computers, I don't know how many of you remember, but they were like office floors, right, of computers. When I got into the computer industry, we were working with, in companies' offices, and it was hot and loud. And this is sort of when the computers moved from offices, big floor offices, and then we had computers by our desks. Then the internet came. We needed the internet for the World Wide Web to come. Then we needed the World Wide Web to have social media, and then we needed social media to help to this contribution of data. And these little, well, not so little, but these steps each built to the point where we are in the fourth Industrial Revolution, and I would argue going into the fifth Industrial Revolution, with the need for AI, for algorithms and data in our environment. So I want to link that Industrial Revolution to literacy and innovation, and you'll see the patterns here. So the first Industrial Revolution, we started to see the integration of public education. Prior to that, it was a very, very elite privilege to be educated. Very few women had that privilege, but it was very, very elite. But with the first Industrial Revolution, there was a realization that, oh my gosh, we need to mass train people. We need to embrace people to get onto the same message and in tow so that we can start to build forward. So we saw the first use of the word literacy. The printing press played a role in that first Industrial Revolution, because those who were in the environment, so mainly in Europe, and I'm looking through much of this through the European and North American lens, but much of those in Europe who started in the first Industrial Revolution, there's a theory, but it's because they were educated through literature. They were able to communicate. They had started to share through written word because of the printing press that was able to train people and bring them up. But there was also, that's why innovation became at the forefront, was because they were educated. So in the second Industrial Revolution, we see rising literacy rates, reading and writing. We see numeracy is becoming a thing as well. So the introduction of needing to understand numbers and in combination with letters and the 3 R's. So second Industrial Revolution, we're now seeing that coming into the school systems. The third Industrial Revolution, there's a realization, we now need to get people to learning to code. We need people to start to learn computational thinking, physical computing, how to use their computers. In each of these stages, there was massive job disruption. So, when the printing press came along, that disrupted writers and bookbinders, and, each of these stages, there is a massive disruption happening. And then the fourth industrial revolution, which I want to talk to you a little bit about coming next, is the importance of algorithms and data, and understanding how we maintain human agency within this environment. So we are now seeing the literacy of machines. Machines are now able to access data, transform that data into knowledge, and respond meaningfully, all within the material and social frameworks that enable connection. So what does that mean for us? That means that we need to get educated on what machines do with our data, how they use our data, and how they are using it to respond with us. I won't go too technical, but I do think it's important when we're building a foundation of knowledge and a foundation of understanding, we need to know where things come from. The word, the definition of AI and what AI means is not set in stone. It is changing, has been changing, and will likely forever change. This is a definition I've chosen because it anchors to the origins of AI and then allows it room to grow. AI is a theory and development of computer systems capable of performing tasks that historically required human intelligence, like recognizing speech, making decisions, and identifying patterns. So we've been looking at AI since the 1950s. It was actually in the United States when the first term came into research papers. And this, a lot of the innovation in comes from the R&D side in universities and in labs at tech companies. So we see artificial intelligence as this theory, machine learning as a subset, deep learning is a subset of machine learning, and then Gen AI is a subset of deep learning and also machine learning. I'm telling you this not so that you memorize, you're not going to get quizzed on afterwards, but it's to understand how we just interchange. And we'll say, oh, machine learning, and it helps to visualize where it sort of fits in the development of it. I believe we need to understand how machines learn to be able to communicate with machines. There are three main big overviews of types of machine learning. The supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning, each one playing a slightly different role in manipulating data and using the data. So machine learning is able to find patterns and make predictions. Supervised learning is the Google Photos. Supervised learning is by training lots of data, so labeling data and categorizing data. Unsupervised learning is finding patterns in data, and reinforcement learning is much like the robotics and driverless cars work with reinforcement learning, and now we're seeing all AI and all machine learning using all three types in just one model. Deep learning, which is really where we are now and why much of the advancements have happened, really around some technology that came from Canada, from Geoffrey Hinton, who's considered one of the AI godfathers, with the transformer in 2012, which really propelled forward deep learning. And this is where we're seeing the replication of the human brain. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, again, back in the 1950s, the idea of AI was to replicate the human brain. How can we get a machine to copy the human brain? And here we have an image of, again, input. We input data, we input prompts. It processes, it goes into this hidden layer, and it outputs. Where research is happening now is a lot in the hidden layers, and this is where a lot of math and a lot of coding is happening. But these are called parameters, and they replicate the brain's neurons. Where we are now, the human brain has about 86 billion neurons. AI at the moment, we're at about 1 billion neurons. So there's still a way to go, but as Steve says, what that time is and how fast, no one really knows. But what's happening in this hidden layer, and it's important for us to be aware, is that these systems are using and inputting data. They're using our data, And we don't know how they're coming out with the outputs. Because these mathematical models, the hidden layer in the middle, can be billions and billions of layers. Here we have 100 parameters, 100 points of connection. But when you're looking at these machines being able to take our data and make predictions, that some of them, if we don't put in the regulations properly, can be high risks to society, that we need to understand how they're making the decisions. And so there was a question a little earlier about the government's role. The government's role here is to put in regulations so that companies have to be transparent about how these machines come up with their answers, how they're coming up, because at the moment we don't know. And how can you control something that we don't know? Generative AI, and I want us to think about the ethical implications of generative AI in this slide. Generative AI really hit by a storm, as Steve mentioned. And in 2022, with ChatGPT 3.5 coming out, and everyone was like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden we're banning ChatGPT in schools and in countries because, how does this work and where is it coming from? But it hadn't just come out of the blue. That was 3.5. There had been versions prior to that. What was happening with our smartphones in our back pockets, using our social media, we were feeding these machines with our data, and they were learning on that data. And so OpenAI, the owners of ChatGPT, over the course of their time, had scraped the internet, 500 billion words, all of our knowledge that we had been feeding into these systems because of these little phones in the back of our pockets, taken all of that data and put it into their models, and that's how come ChatGPT is able to come up with these predictions. The computer power and scientific advances, as I mentioned, as a transformer, also helped propel us to generative AI. But the ethical implications here are around, who said you could take my data? I didn't know. All those years of, on my social media and photos of my kids and whatnot, I wasn't aware that my data was being used. And now Gen AI is able to create new content from our data and our content. So there are a whole load of copyright issues, legal implications happening from the international level. There was an AI summit last week in Paris. A lot of this was being discussed. So at the international level with WEF, World Economic Forum, OECD, the United Nations working on this, down to the countries, and then even down to the municipalities. So to the understanding with literacy, understanding the components, you have the reading and writing, you have the pens and papers. We need to know what the cloud is. So as I was coming from Montreal across in Alaska Airlines, and I looked down and just these beautiful puffy clouds. And I thought, what a shame. Now every time I think about the cloud, I think of this. And I thought, oh gosh. But it wasn't that long ago, and I remember because the cloud didn't exist when I entered tech. So in 2005, 2006, we were still putting data into our personal servers and in the offices. And then we started to move everything into large major data centers. It's important that we know that how this process happens, but it's also important, and I'll talk a little bit later about because of the impact on our climate. So what happens with the cloud is all of our data goes into these using the internet, goes into these massive data centers that are taking football fields of space around the world and going into these servers that are being built using our natural resources, et cetera, and I'll come back to that a bit. But this is what the cloud is. It exists, and we are connected to it. On the software side, so the hardware was the cloud and the communications channels. On the software side, this is where the literacy skills are. Because this is where our brains are doing that input processing, and the output. So as our machines are doing, this is machines literacy, is being able to multimodal data, so all sorts of different data they're taking, we're giving it, from my smartwatch to my sound, my voice, images, text. It's going through lots and lots of code and math to process all of that data, and then it comes out in those outputs. So these are the literacy skills that we need to be working with machines. A simple example of supervised learning, just to have a reference if anybody's asking you, how does it work? When I was teaching kids, we got to over 1 million kids on learning AI. And this was a fun one that we would bring to the kids, and we'd show supervised learning. You have to test and train data. It's really, really important. And I'll come to that also a little later. The transparency, accountability around data, and looking after and protecting your data, your client's data, is really important. But also understanding, where does that data come from? Who trained that data? Has that data been trained responsibly? So the testing and the training of the data. There are humans behind AI machines. AI models and AI robots, they don't have ears and eyes. They don't, they are not human, so they see and hear through data. But they need humans to tell them what is what. So in this, you have a trainer, a data annotator, which is a fairly new job. I don't think it will last for much longer. So this is, again, a sign of the disruption that we're seeing. So data annotators sit for hours and hours a day labeling data and categorizing data. This is a cat. This is a dog. This is a cat. This is a dog. So in this case, you have a dog. So we're trying to train the machine to recognize what a dog is. So what the data annotator needs to do is, this is a dog in this position. This is not a dog, because it needs to be tested on it to show what a dog is not. But it's not always right. Actually, and they are getting better, but they are not always right. And so to do the critical thinking skills, we need to be questioning and not assuming that every output that comes is the right answer, because it's not. So in 2019, 2020, we met with a team at MIT, Joy Balawami's team, who were studying data and biases. And I want you to just watch this for a minute and to give you an idea of the importance of data.
During my first semester at MIT, I got computer vision software that was supposed to track my face. It didn't work until I put on this white mask. I'm thinking, all right, what's going on here? Is it the lighting conditions? Is it the angle at which I'm looking at the camera, or is there something more? That's when I started looking into issues of bias that can creep into technology.
Our ideas about technology that we think are normal are actually ideas that come from a very small and homogeneous group of people.
Vast amounts of data at incredible speeds.
Everybody has unconscious biases, and people embed their own biases into technology.
This kid got stopped as a result of facial recognition misidentification, and then used that as justification to search you. This is an innocent child.
Racism is becoming mechanized.
Systemic issues are only going to be hardwired into new technologies.
It's not just face classification, it's any data-centric technology.
Every day, we are all being scored.
Who gets hired? Who gets housing?
I am making predictions for your life right now.
The people who own the code deploy it on other people, and there is no accountability.
Management analytic towers wanted to install the facial recognition software. Pretty much turn this place into Fort Knox.
The technology is being rapidly adopted, and there are no safeguards.
We are socially controlled in a way that we don't see.
technology that analyzes faces could be biased, but the company is pushing it anyway.
What demographic is it most effective on?
White men.
Show me that it's going to be fair, that it's legal, before you put it out. That's what we don't have yet.
It's going to take people coming together, striving for justice in this age of automation.
So Joy and the team, they were able to get that onto Netflix, and it is available now, and I highly encourage you to watch it to get an idea of the impact, in particularly on marginalized communities and those who are not able to feed these systems with their data, because either they don't have access to the technology, so there's still 3 billion people in the world who don't even have access to the internet, so they don't have access to the technology to feed their stories and feed their data into these machines. So these machines, which are now training themselves, are training themselves on data that is already full of biases. So now we're going to jump over to a little bit of people and planet. In most innovations, what gets hit are people and planet. And I want to go way back to the 1800s. So here we have Bertha Benz. I'm not a car expert, so please don't challenge me on any car details. But Bertha Benz and her husband were considered to develop the first car. It started way back in the 1600s, but with each innovation iteration brought us to this innovation. And when I look at this photo, I think, who would design a car like that? Like, if I was wearing a dress like that, and I had to go sit into the filth, and they wouldn't have had dry cleaning at the time, and oh my gosh, where do I put my bag? And so at the time, the car was coming in, and Bertha was one of the actual first drivers to get into the car. What happens when a new technology or a new innovation comes into society, it targets and it hits usually 3 areas, and I would argue it comes in this order. Industry pushes innovation forward. So industry's job is just to go forward, not to worry. They should, but not all, worry about anything else except innovating and business. Then it's up to the public, it's up to us to get on our soapboxes and say, whoa, wait, whoa, slow down. And then government, we need to be speaking to government. Government, you need to be doing something about this. Industry is going way too fast. We need to do something. Industry, what happened with the car? Whole new jobs. Whole new industries opened up. The public, we were able to connect and reach people that we were never able to before, access jobs that we were never able to, transport materials that we were never able to. Great innovations. And the government then was responsible for putting in stop signs, building out the roads, building out the infrastructure and the channels and the communications network, so we were doing this safely. I want to go to an example of the safety in innovation. So with responsible innovation, it's more than just innovating. We can all innovate. But to what cost? What cost to the people and planet? And have we thought about everyone involved who's using the technology or using the systems? So as Bertha and her gang, the Benz company, were building out machines, more and more companies were starting to build cars and machines, and they were getting bigger and heavier and faster and more of them. And what that meant was more accidents. And people started to die. And so the first idea was in the 1930s, why don't we use dead bodies to act as testers of these machines? It didn't take long to realize that that was actually very ethical. So they got rid of the cadavers, and an actual man in the, I can't remember his name, but in the aerospace, they were using the crash test dummies. So Sierra Sam was built, and then in the 1960s, In the United States, it was mandatory for every car coming onto the road to have been tested for safety, to make sure that seatbelts were in the right place, airbags were being put in, and they were able to gather the information and test properly. But there was one blind spot. Women make up 62% of all new cars sold in the United States. I was actually quite surprised. I didn't think it was, I thought it would be, if any, 50-50. But 73% chances of serious injuries. So any seatbelt wearing female vehicle occupant has 73% greater chance of serious injuries over a male. They are also 17% more likely to be killed. And I think, why would that be? Why? These aren't small numbers. These are pretty big numbers. And it's because no one thought to create a female version of the crash test dummy. 160 years later, in 2023, the first female crash test dummy was developed. You think, how can that happen? Likely because there were no women involved in designing and developing the machines. So as we go through and move forward at this barreling speed, we need to think about lots of things, but we need to think about, have we included everyone in the conversation? So a few key strategies to innovation. And I always start with own your own soapbox. I literally have a soapbox at home and I stand on, and I have lobbied so many governments and written so many letters and tried to change so many laws to do through my work about owning your soapbox, and your voice is almighty powerful. I've seen it. I've raised millions and millions of dollars because of it, and being able to bring that into children's education. So we can do it. But we need to stay curious and ignite our love of play. Through researching my book, it became very paramount, evident very quickly about the importance of curiosity and play in our education and how quickly we lose it as adults. Don't let failure stop you. It's part of progress. I failed so many times, dusted off the knees, and you got to get yourself back up again. Look out for the sharp objects and opportunities and collaboration on upwards, downwards, sideways, wherever you can find opportunity. We need to move forward with government, civil society, and industry. We can't let one outpace the other, and we are at a time where this is not aligned. And now we're going to move to the important ethical implications on our people and our planet. So AI is neither good or bad. It is what we've just seen. It's a bunch of data, algorithms, needs lots of energy. And it's up to us to decide how we want it to be used. AI and people has incredible opportunities. Two of the main areas being impacted by AI and for its progress, positive progress, is healthcare and in education. So in healthcare, it's being used to detect all sorts of cancers, find new ways of curing cancers. It's able to route ambulances in different ways. It's able to reach communities in Canada. We have large areas of fly-in communities that don't have doctors. So now we're able to connect through technology. In education, we are in a world crisis of shortage of teachers at the moment. Education can AI in education can lift the burden of administrative tasks. It can reach kids that may not have fallen into the I'm a normal kid in the classroom. It can help with issues like dyslexia, other learning difficulties, all sorts of amazing opportunities. But it also has an impact on the planet, on people, apologies. So ChatGPT, while it was training on 500 billion words scraped from the internet, had to figure out a way, and it wasn't just OpenAI, many of the tech companies did this and are doing this, had to find a way to deal with the stuff we don't want to look at. The stuff that, that either we turn our noses to, or even worse, causes psychological damage. So what they did was farm it out to the global south. Digital sweatshops, similar to sweatshops that we know in the fashion industry, digital sweatshops are a thing. And it's up to us to make sure that we know who is training the data and put pressure to not allow this to continue. We are repeating patterns that we've been through. Gender stereotypes. When we got our first car GPS, it didn't understand my voice. GPS, the early models were trained only on men's voices. And so it didn't respond, it didn't register my voice. So think about the impact. Well, why is Siri a female voice? So why are companies using certain voices? And there's been a lot of pressure on these industries to watch out for this, and Joy's work has been instrumental in this. So we're seeing a lot of work being done to be inclusive. But we need to be looking and thinking about data and our data and how these machines are able to magically come up with these outputs and the impact. AI and the planet. Amazing, amazing work that's happening in AI and the planet. Everything from our homes to bring down energy consumption. It's been used down in Africa, in most of the countries at the moment, helping with farmers navigate climate droughts, track animals. Really, the amount of data that researchers are able to gather at the moment is really rich, and they're able to really work towards some good impact and fight some difficult problems that we've had. But it's also making a huge impact, negative impact on our planet. These massive data centers, some of them can fit up to 50,000 servers. So if you had a server in your office, imagine that 50,000 times. The heat, again, and the noise that comes, the noise pollution, and the water needed to cool these machines down is taking water in areas where they are already at droughts and using it to cool off these systems. So we're using one of our most precious resources. It is also energy hungry. It needs so much energy. So even though we think, oh, we're just using it on our phone, that whether it's Claude that we're using on our phone or ChatGPT, and sorry, I'm not going on, I'm just using ChatGPT because I think it's the one that we know the most. I don't have a thing. But every time we send a query, it's not happening on our phone, it's happening in these massive data centers. They're using huge amounts of energy, and that's why if you're reading the news, you'll hear nuclear energy coming back, fusion energy, and all sorts of different ways of generating energy. And it's also really, really heavy on our natural resources. So really heavy on our natural resources. So the land that we're using, the mining of precious metals that we're taking from the earth, we're taking from the oceans to feed these batteries, to build these batteries, to build these machines. And then where do they go afterwards when we move on to the next technology and the next advancement of that technology? Having technical issues. So literacy in the age of AI. So we've gone through literacy and innovation and some of the impacts of innovation on people and planet. As Steve mentioned, we're entering now into this cognitive age, leveraging the synergies between human intelligence and computational power of AI. So what is AI? These are questions that you need to be answering, and I hope I've helped add a little bit here. But what is AI? And your teams need to be. How does it learn and how does it communicate? What is the role of data and algorithms and the ethical implications? Most importantly, what are your human strengths? Because that 10% of your human strengths is what's going to make you great. And working with AI, which can do the other 90%. In Montreal, as I mentioned, it's the hub of responsible AI. This is probably one of the biggest areas that we talk about and discuss how globally, with a technology that has no borders, how are we making sure that we are being responsible and to be inclusive with everybody? For you, having owned a charity, I would say, what is the mission of your company? What are the values of your company? Because that's going to help guide you through how to use AI and how to bring AI into your company, to stay true to who you are as an organization and bring it in as a tool rather than as it coming and taking over. The commitment to responsible AI, and this is where you need the soapbox, privacy and security, the ethical implications of data, so who, what, where, why, when. All of those questions need to be answered when you're interacting with AI. The inclusiveness, accountability, and explainability, and transparency, these are the responsibilities of governments to be forcing onto industry to make sure that companies are being responsible in their AI. As you bring in AI tools, be careful of what your third parties are using that data, how they're using the data as well. Data, we can't see it. We can't smell it. But it is there, and we need to make sure that we're being responsible. And then transparency with your team and the people around you. Make sure that you are being true to why you're using it, how you're using it, and when you're using it, so that it's not a hidden myth, a mystery on when you're using it or not. I'm quite happy to tell people when I'm using it. I did not use it for any of my slides, but when I'm using it or when I'm not using it. So your role and what next? There are so many AI courses. Steve has provided also resources. Review your tasks. Review the things that you do on a daily basis and how you think that technology and AI systems can help start to take some of that work on. Strengthen your human skills and try. I mean, it's great that there are the computers out there to give it a try. And embrace the unknown and be comfortable in the uncertainty. But most importantly, ask a question, can AI even help? AI is a tool and doesn't solve everything. So is AI a tool that can be helped? And if it is, the answer is yes, then what is the responsible AI framework that you will be using in your organization? And there you go. Thank you for taking the time listening. I think we are at time. Yeah? Can you yell it out?
Our table has several questions. Mine is just the news over the last 2 or 3 weeks about DeepSeek. I'm just wondering if you share a little bit about it and what it means for the big five that we heard about earlier, that are spending upwards of $300 billion towards this?
Now, in terms of, I would say the open technology. Sorry about that. I think DeepSeek was a great wake-up call, and it was a way of showing the big five or the big tech companies that by open source and having access to how these models are working means that it doesn't require billions and billions of dollars to build these AI models, that you can, each country or even as companies, you can now start to build your own system. So I would thank the open source community for and in this case, Llama, which is owned by Meta, played a role in that, and Hugging Face, which is an open source AI community. They allowed for DeepSeek to access a lot of the work that had been done and build off it. It's interesting that OpenAI or ChatGPT is, I'm not sure if they're suing them yet, but they're not quite happy with the fact that DeepSeek has claimed to have stolen their data, which is quite interesting given that ChatGPT stole most of the internet's data. But there's a lot of, again, copyright stuff going on. I think it's great for technology, to be honest.
Are you okay answering another question at this table?
Yeah, oh yeah, sure, sorry.
Retired school nurse and read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt not too long ago. Could you talk a little bit about, the cell phones in the classroom and what this is doing to kids' mental health, the constant scrolling and what have you, and, just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure, and it's an area where I spend quite a bit of time with researchers in the mental health areas in Montreal with the universities, and given my work with youth in the coding space. I was never a fan of one laptop per child or one computer per child, because kids will figure out how this stuff is working. They don't need us to show them how to use the technologies, and I think we need to be building the human-to-human relationships and not having this mediator in between. So in the 2012s, when social media came, but really took off, and smartphones were more readily accessible, and the youth were starting to use it, we were all starting to see the patterns on not just the mental health, but the hunger of technology companies to get to these kids. That's where there was a lot of pressure we were trying to put on governments to put in regulations. I think Australia is probably the first country that's actually banned it from schools. I know in Quebec it is banned, but it's not a countrywide ban. It's really worrying. It's really worrying, and I do think the phones should be banned from schools. I think we need to be building human-to-human relationships. I think we need to be getting rid of the top-down teacher lecturing. I think we need to be redesigning the classroom so that our kids are learning to collaborate, to communicate, to learn from each other. I don't know what it's like up here in Juneau, but in Montreal, about 90% of the kids coming into the school systems are new immigrants from something like 70 different countries. How are they learning to work together and build together? So the phone doesn't help in that case. The social media, I don't think helps. I like to think of a digital community and a physical community, and I think the school is a physical community, and the kids will find their digital community, and they'll find their people, but I think the classroom needs to stay phone-free. Yeah.
Thank you. My question, my name's Ashley Guernsey, and I'm with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And my question was kind of building on the parallel that you brought between the car example in terms of the policy implications here in the U.S. once the cars were built, jaywalking became outlawed very quickly after, while before walkers had shared the road with other modes of transportation. And then also the way that our cities are built are very car-centric. Some of the lobbying by early car companies still affects the ways that our cities look very different than those in other countries. So I'm kind of curious what sort of responsible policy making is happening in Montreal and what that looks like to try to combat what could similarly be happening in AI.
So that's a great question. And again, because it's borderless, and I mean, I think we're all seeing how politically tied AI is now. It plays a political role, an economic role, a social role. It does need collaboration across the countries. Montreal is one of the leaders in that space. Again, the AI Summit in Paris was maybe 2 weeks ago now, and Montreal is very present. The global AI for partnerships for AI is one of the leaders, and also in Montreal. So there's a lot of work being done to try and bring in regulations around the use of data, the training of data, and all of the stages from development and deployment, but it needs collaboration, and we're seeing a number of areas deregulating and removing legislation and removing laws because of the possibility of it slowing down innovation or another country perhaps going faster than and taking over. There have been some of the leaders signed, some of the AI leaders, most of them from Montreal in Canada, signed a letter asking for the big tech to stop, slow down, give us a stop. I don't think stopping is a solution because you can't stop innovation, but we do need to be speeding up regulation. In Canada, our Prime Minister is about to step down, which has just stopped in the House our regulations for AI, and we don't know where it's sitting on a pile somewhere. So again, it's so tied to politics, and this is why I get on my soapbox. We all need to be on our soapboxes because we can't rely on the politicians to be making the best decisions right now.
One more question. I'm wondering along the lines of the different type of AI tools that are available at our laptops and on our phones, will they be narrowing down of those tools? Because you have ChatGPT and maybe 10 to 15 other types. Do you think it'll come down just like with the 8-track versus the different types of storage medium? Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't know. There've been some really interesting conversations about this on whether AI is going to be the economic boom that we all think or that we're reading about, because much like the airline industry, it became it's everywhere, but it didn't really become. It loses money all the time. So there's never been a boom per se. All of these foundational models, so from the big companies, have been trained on more or less the same data. It's just how their math and all the fancy stuff happening in between the neural networks that they come out with slightly different predictions. But there is, again, there's a lot of pressure being put on ChatGPT or OpenAI. I think they're being sued for $3 billion at the moment from the different, variations. I know in Canada we've got journalists suing a number of the big tech companies because of the scraping of data and the use of the data without paying for it. So we're really in early stages of where this is going to go in terms of, is there going to be a winner? I think, the race to AGI, why? I usually, I think like, why do we need artificial general intelligence? But there's a race to it, and the big techs are all racing towards that. Will there be a winner? Probably a winner, but to what expense and the damage done along the way, that I don't know. So to answer your question, I don't know if there will be. They're all very similar. It's who's got the biggest models and most data and computing power and NVIDIA chips and It just doesn't make very much sense to me at the moment for why.